Hello, everyone. Welcome to Step into the Pivot. We're so happy to have you here with us today. We have an amazing guest today who's going to tell her story. And I know most of the story, but it's something that I always think about. And I'm grateful to have met Kim McVicker at a couple conferences a couple years in a row, and we connected. And last year, she told the story, part of her story. So Kim has been she was part of the financial services industry for a long time, then left for a short period of time. She exited and now she's back. So we're very happy to have her back. And part of that exit is part of her story. So I'm not going to go into too much, but Kim, we are so thankful to have you here today. So thank you for joining us. Okay,
Thank you.
Evie. Yeah, you're welcome. Evie, I'm going to let you kind of take it over.
Well, yes, Kim, so good to have you here. Welcome. And I met you, it was one of those stories that I love to share about, being female in financial industry and then just essentially looking for looking for others who could relate to me through that, experience of being a woman, very often the only one in the room in the roles that we were in. And you were one of those women, one of those few women in roles traditionally occupied by our, male colleagues. And, that's just an observation when you and I met. And this was now, oh my gosh, I think it was at least 10 years ago, maybe more.
Mhm.
Here we both were just working. And I loved meeting you. I loved getting to know you. And we were talking about some possibilities of our organizations talking and working together. And it was great. And there was this, event that we then saw each other in person at. There was a lot of, hustle and bustle and it's just everything was just we were in a networking context. So I want to describe that to our listeners, networking context, and everything about that was a pleasant and easy experience and very bubbly. You struck me as someone very vivacious, joyful, and you just couldn't help yourself but be that bubbly person. And we hit it off that way. And then fast forward, another event like that, several years later, we see each other again, same situation. We have not really kept in touch personally for a variety of reasons in between those two events. And I see you, and something's different. There's just a change in that um, bubbliness, vivaciousness. And I ask you, how are you? And you go for a very authentic share, and you say, it's been really hard. And it just that the before and after really stayed with me, and also the power of your willingness to go vulnerable with me even though we haven't seen each other in a few years. And you said it's been really hard, and thank you for being here on the show and being willing to tell us that story. So tell us the story of Nicole, please. What was behind
Yeah.
that share?
Yeah. And that just brought to mind I remember seeing you and that event, the more recent one. I felt that would be a safe space for me to kind of step my toes back into the water of interacting with this community of people who are so wonderful, but still when you're out and coming back in, it can be a scary thing. Like, am I the new kid now? That fear of not fitting in, even after being 30 plus years in the business. And so I recall seeing you, and what stands out to me is I had gone to the spa and I apologized immediately for how I looked. And you said, why are you apologizing for doing something good for yourself? And I just love that you said that to me so quickly without giving it any thought. And I really appreciated it. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So
It looked to me like you were carrying something really heavy, and it looked to me like this. this was a needed experience. That spa was not a luxury. That experience was like, I need this so that I can keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's you know, my daughter Nicole, um, she died right after her 30th birthday. And oddly enough, I think you both have a knack for timing. I listened to Jeff Atchison's in a podcast recently. And so it was just recently, would have been my daughter's 34th birthday. And it is just about a week. It's exactly a week. From today will be 4 years since she died. Um, and you know, when I think about my daughter, and I did not, I know one of the things we're going to talk about is maybe my openness um, within the workplace, within the industry about the struggles that we went through, you know, from really probably her mid-teens forward. So half of her life, she was really struggling in a variety of ways. And, you know, I am not incognizant of the fact that there is a great deal of codependency that I think presents itself in those type of situations with a parent and a child and addiction. And she had been diagnosed as bipolar in her later teen years, and it was a struggle for her to take her medications consistently. Um, it was challenging for me when she was first put on medication as well. I knew that she needed medication, but there were so many aspects of her personality that I think I didn't know what might go away, you know, with the medication, and would we lose those endlessly fascinating and interesting pieces of her with the medication. But it really ended up that I didn't have a lot to worry about in that respect. It's really difficult, I think, for many people with bipolar or various other circumstances to maybe want to take their medication on a regular basis. And then I would say that that challenge is compounded when you're dealing with someone with an addiction who may be in and out. You might not see them for days. They're not going to consistently be taking their medication. So, uh, you know, with all of the struggles that we had and everything that had happened, I had no idea. And just to Iowa, and I certainly know the opioid crisis was not limited to certain geographic areas of the country. It really touched everywhere. But to hear heroin, to be living here in Des Moines, Iowa, that was just it was stunning, and it was the last thing and I ever would have expected. And it had actually been going on for a period of time before any of us realized that that was the case. So once that is known, I think there's no response from any friend, family, loved one when you know that, um, because you see overdoses, you know, constantly out there in the news and everywhere you look, and so it becomes this constant terror that the person you so desperately want to sustain could die at any moment. So, you know, I went, you know, for years and years, and I was working and doing the corporate, you know, gig that so many of us have. And I know I was so fortunate to have the flexibility that I had and the resources that I had to be able to get Nicole back and forth to this appointment or that appointment for her psychologist, her psychiatrist, to be able to take her and find one rehab facility after another and the means to pay for those rehab facilities. But she always walked out. She always walked out. And she ended up being arrested, and it turned into really a blessing for me. The first time she was arrested, I was devastated, and it was too late in the evening for me to do anything about it. And I was running around the next day, um, going to the bank, getting cash, going to post bail to get her out. And that was the only time that I ever felt that way, because it became apparent very soon after that that was really the very safest place for her to be. Um, and so I appreciated those times when she was in jail, um, and she went to prison. She went to prison 3 different times, one charge, but she kept having parole violations that sent her back. And so some people might get up and look at the inmates online because they're afraid they're going to see someone out there that they're worried about. I would be thrilled when I would see her mugshot out there. It was the best possible thing. And I remember one time getting ready for a business trip to New York, and the day before, I was going to take Nicole to an appointment, and she wasn't answering the door, and she had overdosed. I was instructed to pull her to the floor and do chest compressions. They were able to revive her. She was taken to the hospital, and I followed along in the ambulance. And I remember calling Irene Scalfani, who was my boss at that time. And she said, "You don't need to come to New York tomorrow, just stay home." And I said, this is the best time now for me to come to New York, because I'm going to make sure that she's taken back in, and then I can sleep at night. I won't be worried about the phone call that I might get. So I juggled and balanced that. And I think, it would be so lacking of the story of Nicole to say this is, the scenario. And I did talk about her with my industry friends, with people at work. But one of the reasons that I talked about her so much as I was thinking about it is because she was probably the most interesting person I had ever met. So, she loved to talk about energy and vibrations, and, she would always carry a hula hoop and a Bluetooth speaker, because she said music, meant everything to her. And so just so many of the things about her that were so different and unique. She was just completely herself. She had pet chickens, she had pet turkey. She asked my husband to find her a big stick because she wanted to sand it and paint it, and she was going to make herself a hobo stick. But I think, some of these things about her, in hindsight, when I think about it, I didn't appreciate, and I had never heard the word neurodiversity, that then someone had asked me about in my writing about Nicole, because there were things that I think made it difficult for her to maneuver through the world. And I didn't understand how she saw things differently and how that might have impacted her. She smelled colors. She saw the year as an egg. She always called it the egg. So she never pictured like a calendar with the months. It was the egg. And every year to her, the egg would be sliced into different size segments, depending how long each month felt to her. But June was always the largest segment of the egg, is what she said. So there were these things that she experienced, and then to put on top of that the bipolar, which, I had heard her tell my mom one time that it could be exhausting to be with herself, because you could have a conversation with her and she fully intended to go from point A to point B, but you would go probably 10 different places in between. But I think that's part of what made her so interesting and fascinating was she picked up all the colorful bits of experience along the way, and she valued all of them very deeply. Um, and she always said she was on a mission to bring back kindness. Um, she would speak to strangers, she would compliment people, but she said it had to be sincere. She would never compliment someone unless she sincerely meant it. So if she stopped someone to say, "You have a lovely sweater," she truly believed that they had a lovely sweater. Um, she had just these convictions that were so important to her. Her fingers were always filthy. She smoked, but she would never litter. So she would have a collection of cigarette butts in her purse. She generally didn't have any money, but what was in her purse was a bunch of cigarette butts. So her fingers were always dirty from putting her cigarette butts in her purse. But I I remember talking to her once after she'd had numerous psych evaluation and one of many, and she said they asked me that one question that I just hate. And I said, "Well, what question was it?" And she said, "The question, do you hear things other people don't?" And I said, "Well, that's like, what did you say?" Because I'm thinking, well, there's only one right answer for that question. You're supposed to like say no. And she said, I told him, "How the hell do I know?" And I said, "Well, I don't think why'd you say that?" And she said, "Well, because how do I know? Unless I ask every single person every time I hear something, if they heard it too, I would never know." And that's just how her brain worked. And I treasured it. So, with all of the difficulties, she just also brought, I think, endless delight. And she was absolutely pleasant and respectful, and every police officer in the community knew her by name. She was always very, very, she was always careful to tell them if they wanted to look in her bag. She would always be very honest. She would say, "Be careful, I have syringes in there. I have hepatitis. Be careful, I don't want you to get poked." Um, and so she was, I think, treated sometimes a little bit too tenderly by some. And I think that part of it is she was, this, perhaps in some people's eyes, this privileged girl in the suburbs that would have been dealt with more harshly. And I would be begging the police sometimes to arrest her for some of these things. And they would just say, "Oh, Nicole, you need to just get on home. You're not supposed to be here." Or they would take the 30 syringes from her bag and send her on her way. Um, Maybe because they thought they were doing her a favor. But I think she really had no safe space from herself unless she was locked up. So there was always tremendous activity taking place with her over the years. There was never like any quiet time. But I think one of the things, and I think this is something that I hope everyone appreciates, that with everyone that we're dealing with, whether it be at work or in your personal life, you may know and you might think you know, and they may be very open and share a lot of things. But what I didn't ever probably make clear or share was what it was really doing to me. And I think maybe the best illustration of that, after she had died, the doctors asked me if I was feeling a lot of anxiety, and then that my doctor sent me to a therapist, and they said, "You must be feeling a lot of anxiety." And the answer was no, I wasn't. Um, but I had spent 10 years um, holding that anxiety the inability to sleep. I generally kept my ringer turned off on my phone. I couldn't stand to hear my phone ring. And even now, it's very difficult for me to have my ringer turned on. It causes stress um, when I hear that.
Yeah. I love the way you talk about her. Just, your memories and what you have, but I can also appreciate, all the fear and anxiety you were going through at the time. Can you talk a little about that power that you felt you had going through that loss, right? You lost a few things. You didn't only lose Nicole,
Mm-hmm.
you lost something else around the same time. And
Yeah.
and I think you felt that, maybe you wouldn't withstand everything that was going on. Can you
Mm-hmm.
talk a little about that? Because I think it's an important piece of your story.
Yeah. So, I had worked at the same company for more than 30 years, and I loved my team, and in fact, kind of tying back to when Nicole died, I was horrified, but then I found I was very grateful. Irene Scalfani uh, had my entire team fly here to Des Moines, and so they were all here with me, which I thought I did not want. In fact, I was horrified, but it turned out to be just the wonderful moment I needed in those days after she had died. So I think it speaks volumes to the closeness and community that we have within this business. But um, I was not only, I think, dealing with the loss of Nicole, and she had had a baby, and I was also greatly financially responsible for caring for my mom, who was retired on a very limited income, and then I lost my job. And had the circumstances been different, I think I might have reacted differently. But I think I had shared, Teresa, when I spoke a couple of months ago. I I regretted it and felt grief for about a day, and then I didn't. Um, certainly no one wants to be in that position and have that taken from you when it's not by your choosing. But at the same time, I realized it wasn't the worst thing that could happen. It wasn't the end of the world. And I also realized how much I was no longer in love with what I was doing, um, with various things. And I think it's really important to give yourself that space and that grace to really do an honest assessment once in a while about where you're at, and if it's what you really want to be doing, knowing that everything could change in an instant, not by your choosing, but by other factors that can impact our lives. Had you spent those years doing what you were really passionate about? And I think that was something that I was given, maybe the courage and confidence to see things differently. And it's really, I would say, in a lot of ways, like different things I might be dealing with. That's just kind of a day-to-day thing, but I might find very challenging. Um, then I will tell myself, this is not that big of a deal. And a lot of times it's not saying you survived, the loss of your career and the loss of your only child, and you can make it through, this dental appointment or whatever. But it's more, I think I also lean on um, what Nicole went through that I will never fully appreciate and understand. And so I think there is a grit and bravery that she had that I have to think about what she lived through and She was a survivor of, human trafficking. She um, was unhoused for, um, you know, quite a bit of her adult life. She was, living on the streets, and this was I would say a soft girl from the suburbs who had never pushed a lawnmower, but yet she somehow managed to make her way through life in ways that I never would have imagined that she would have been able to survive. And that was really, I think, where, there were so long that everyone wants their children to thrive. And I wanted that as well. But there became a point that really I just wanted her to survive. That was really kind of what was left. So I think that's what made me see things differently.
Yeah.
I don't
I
know if
mean,
that answered the question
yeah.
very well.
Oh, this is such a, it's such a massive experience that you've been through. Such an impact on your life, on your, I mean, just everything, every area of your life. And I deeply appreciate how you're willing to go deeper and look deeper and also go further and really explore this entire, landscape. And some of it has to do with, being willing to feel the immensity of the pain of the loss, and then some of it is deciding, like you're demonstrating simply here being with us, that you're going to continue to tell her story and share her legacy. I wrote down a few notes, things like bring back kindness. There's so much kindness in what you're talking about. Sincerity was a key word that you used to describe your daughter, and here you are being so sincere, being willing to really think outside the box and think in terms of eggs. How cool is that? I don't think I will ever think about the year the same way after this conversation. So, Kim, as you're showing to us this willingness to peel back the layers and really delve into the core, maybe of that, egg shaped experience, bravery comes to mind, like lots of courage that you're bringing up here, talking about it. You started talking
Resilience.
about the theme of resilience, exactly, right?
For
As your
sure.
daughter also being resilient, even through some of the most challenging
Yeah.
experiences. Tell us about, how did all of this, because I mean, it's impossible to talk about your experience as a pivot. There were so many different pivots that you had to do. Like this is like a cumulative, cumulative pivot that you had, and then there's the big lost day, right? Tell us about how did all of this make you tap into the perspective of this, bravery and resilience?
Well, I think when I hear stories of people who lose a family member or a child and it was sudden and abrupt, and I am so struck by the pain that must carry, because well, I don't think that um you can ever prepare yourself. I also feel like I had the front row seat, and I hate to use a cliche, but what was a very slow moving train crash happening right before me, that I could try as much as I wanted to stop, and I just could not stop it. And so I think I spent a lot of time trying to prepare myself. Um, I had this constant fear and dread that Nicole was going to die, but I was trying to be prepared. And my husband would say all the time, I don't know what's going to happen to you if something happens to her. And we were so entwined at that point. I spent every second, I was looking at rehab centers, I was looking at alternative therapies, I looked at energy cleansing, sound healing, I looked for jobs for her. I would have paid someone to hire her if it would have made her feel that she was productive. I would have done anything to save her. And as much as I said I'm prepared and I'll be prepared and it won't take me down if something happens to her, but her survival, my survival had really become so tightly tied to hers, that, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if things would have played out the way they did, um, had there not been Ruby. That
Okay. So, well,
changed everything.
that's a really great, like, I really love that you shared this story, Nicole, but there's way more to this story.
Yep.
Okay. So let's move our story on to talk about Ruby because she is, the reminder, the everyday reminder of Nicole, right? We've talked about this. And what really struck me, you told this story of Ruby in such a way at the conference we were just at, in front of the entire group. And the bravery it took to do that was amazing. But I want to spend some time talking about Ruby because she is an important piece of your puzzle, right?
Yeah.
Like, and is and continues to be. So you took Ruby. You said earlier that Nicole had had a baby, and that is Ruby. So how
Hmm.
old was Ruby when you took her on?
Yeah. So Ruby was just shy of 5 months old when Nicole died. And in fact, I had been there that night, and I was there that morning because Nicole had been sick and she wanted to make sure that someone would be there to take care of Ruby. Um, and, in hindsight, there were things in those days before Nicole wanted to make sure I knew how to give Ruby a bath. She wanted me to see how she gave her a foot massage with lotion. She wanted me to sleep in her bed that night because the bassinet was in there, and I said no, I refused. I slept on the couch, and so um, I was there to get Ruby when she woke up, and that's when I found Nicole. But I think, in all fairness, I have to say, I spent the majority of Nicole's pregnancy saying, I am not taking a baby. There is no way in hell I am taking a baby. You better get that through your head and you better figure things out. So you're going to have to change some things, because if you have a baby and you go back to jail, or if God forbid you die, I will not be taking this baby. I'm not doing it. And I avoided it for a long time, for several months. And Nicole was in prison until just the last month or so of her pregnancy, and so she was clean, and Ruby was born healthy with no issues. Um, but I remember standing in the kitchen, and the social worker had been called because there was a baby, and um, I remember standing there, and the social worker looked at me, and my sister Jessica was standing there with me, and she said, "Is someone going to take the baby?" And I hesitated. I hesitated briefly, but I did. I hesitated. And my sister, Jessica, and I remember looking at her, and she didn't hesitate at all. And she said, "I will. I'll take the baby." And to put it in full perspective, um, my sister had walked across the street from her apartment, her very small apartment that she lived in with her husband and her 5-year-old daughter. She was a stay-at-home mom, very limited financial resources, really no space in their place. And she immediately said she would take Ruby. And I will also say she's 16 years younger than me. So she has got a little bit more energy and maybe patience than I do. But um, I truly believe I meant it when I said those things to Nicole throughout the pregnancy. And I even remember the first time my husband held Ruby, And he said, well, now you've done it. I told you I thought it'd be best if I not be around Ruby, because the second I see her, and this was days after she was born, he said, I'll never let her go if something were to happen. And so I think we collectively took Ruby. My husband and I, since I was the closest next of kin, went through the guardianship process. Initially, that's all we could do. Ruby's father was not willing to relinquish his parental rights at that point. And so we went through the guardianship process, and I think in my mind, I created a scenario that it did make more sense for my sister Jessica to keep her a good chunk of the time. My husband and I were both working full time at that point. Travel had started picking up a little bit post COVID. And so, but it gave me something to do also. Had I not had to think about finding a bigger home for my sister and her family and Ruby, and then we moved my mom in with them too. So I focused on that, and I threw all my attention into finding a bigger home and getting furniture and hiring movers. And then what else did they need? And what else did they need? And so I instead of stopping to think about all that I had lost, I focused on everything that had to be done. And so we would bounce Ruby back and forth. And we still do that actually today. But it totally changed our life. We had no children at home. We could do whatever we wanted, and suddenly that was gone.
I wanted
So
to present something, Kim, because as we're listening to you, and then what you talked about in the first part of the story too, you are speaking into a tremendous amount of stress that you endured. These days the word stress is used so easily, and I know that we're starting to understand stress in all of its complexities better than ever before. We're aware of healthy stress and healthy doses of stress being necessary in our lives so we can thrive. And what you are talking about is at least, I mean, what are we talking about? At least a decade and probably longer of enduring an incredible amount of chronic stress that was at the level of what is, when you look at some of the categories of stress in the realm of intolerable and toxic, that really leads to fatigue that is a something that is diagnosable as a like, yep, now it happened. And burnout is another word that we often use these days very casually. And I think that's okay. I think it's because people are becoming more attuned to, if I don't prevent this from happening, I'm going to end up in burnout. But the word is thrown around also. It really is about something that you're describing. When we're really burnt out, guess what happens from a biological to biochemical and then mental, cognitive, emotional standpoint? You lose interest in your work. You're like, it's not as important anymore, or it feels like I can't do this. And I'm not mocking that state. I'm really just saying that we start to kind of shut down in ways that look like I can't do this. There's no way I'm going to be able to do this. But it's a byproduct of the immensity of the stress that you went through. And so I just wanted to send you so much grace and compassion and love and support, and really love into all the nooks and crannies, even of these decisions that you're like not able to make quickly. And you're like, I hesitated. Of course you hesitated, when we consider the mountain that you were both, on and over and under. And so it's just really, this has been heavy and difficult. And of course, it's going to take a village to raise this
yeah,
child.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah, and I think and Teresa and I talked about too, and I hadn't thought about it from this perspective before, but when I did lose my job, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I did some work for a nonprofit a little bit, but it was nothing time consuming at all. But I still, during that time, I could have had Ruby here during the days more. But I still largely kept to that schedule that she was with my husband and I Friday afternoons through Monday mornings. And I would like to say I was doing a bunch of brilliant things that we all dream of doing when we're retired or find ourselves with all of this time on our hands. But I didn't. I would wake up every day and kind of do nothing. I would do a lot of nothing. And every day I would think I was going to do something. And then I would sit and think, well, I can do that tomorrow. And it was very difficult for me. And I probably spent more time talking to my therapist about that than anything else, was this sense of failure that I should be doing something, because I had always been doing something or taking care of Nicole, and any damages Nicole caused, I always felt responsible for. So I was cleaning up after Nicole, or I was taking care of my mom, or you know um, thinking of some big elaborate play date for my sister's daughter, for something for us to do. I was constantly doing, plus working. And when I wasn't doing that anymore, I just didn't do anything. Um, and I would even like to say I spent some of that time maybe sitting with everything I lost, but I don't think I can honestly tell you I did that either. I don't know that I have. Um, at this point. Not really, not fully. I think I keep everything very bucketed in these like compartments of space of when I allow for it then to come out. Um, and I think that some of that that need, that feeling of being responsible for everything and everyone and everyone's happiness is what makes it maybe sometimes feel extremely challenging. As much as I absolutely love it when Ruby's here, and my husband doesn't understand why I feel that it can be tiring and exhausting. It's because that emotional labor, and I don't want to paint with a broad brush from a gender specific perspective, but it's generally women who take that on. And so, um, when Ruby is here, my husband could be sitting in the same room and she'll still come and find me if she wants something. And when I'm thinking about, does she need yogurt pouches or string cheese, or back when she was wearing diapers, and then, my husband would say, all you have to do is tell me and I'll get them. And that's the whole point, though, that like reinforces I still am the one that has to know and keep track. And then if I just dictate to you, so it's that invisible effort that, again, I'm not saying it's always the women, but it often is, um, that come into play on top of everything else. Um, so, and part of it, I think, is my own doing. It's been hard for me, I think, to accept that, you know, we did adopt Ruby. Her dad wanted to have us terminate his rights. He didn't want to be responsible for child support, or have any obligations. And so we did do that, and we adopted her 2 years ago. But I will never say that I'm her mother. There's a new birth certificate that says I am her mother, which is ridiculous because I did not have a baby at 50 years of age. Um, and I know many people who adopt children celebrate that day, and it's a treasured thing to get that birth certificate. It was one of the worst days of my life because I think I didn't realize that that new birth certificate was going to erase Nicole. Um, and if I don't have to, I will always show Ruby her first one, her real one. But I'm not Ruby's mom. I'm still her grandma, or her Mimi, as she calls me. And I think I want to be the Mimi while not having her in, I want to do the Mimi things, but I can't do Mimi things for like 80 hours straight. It's just so I can't find that balance of not wanting to deliver that razzle dazzle.
Yeah.
And so it's very exhausting, but she also is a wonderful gift. I would not have it any other way. And I try and, I mean, and I joke with her. She's 4 now, and but sometimes she just won't get off of me. And I'll say, "What do I want you to do with your head?" Sometimes, Ruby, and she'll say, "Pull it out of your butt." And I'll say, "That's right. Please pull it out of my butt." Um, but but I am trying to, and I try and remind myself that instead of thinking about some of this as things I have to do, like I have to get up, even though I wouldn't have to get up on a Saturday, but I have to get up because there's a 4-year-old poking me saying, "Is it morning time?" But I get to. I get to wake up and have her poking me and saying, "Snuggle time," and she's hugging me and climbing all over me, that I get to have that experience. It's not so, some people don't. And one day I will not wake up and I won't. But so I'm trying to always kind of think of it in that perspective, but it is not always easy. But um, yesterday morning, we got up, and with the time change, I was like, "Oh, what time is she gonna get up?" And she got up pretty early, and um, I said, "You're my treasure." And she said, "You're my treasure." And then she said, "You're my gold medal." And I was like, "Well, that's pretty nice to be someone's gold medal." And so those kinds of things are worthwhile. And as we move through time, I think if there's something that I view as challenging besides the emotional lift and the physical, and um Ruby's doctor said we'll have to like go through grief. She'll go through grief multiple times. So we'll have to tell her and she'll process it, but then we'll have to talk about it and she'll process it differently. And so there's this kind of lens into the future of knowing that we're going to have to kind of relive the loss with her multiple times because she was too young to know. And so that conversation will be different each time. And I don't want to lose those important things. I want her to know about her mom. And, there's, this sounds really ridiculous, but in some ways I feel it's easier that to tell her, you know, that her mom had died. And I have told her that now. I didn't for a long time. I finally did last summer. She never asked about her dad. And I feel like that's going to be more challenging because I almost feel like
Yeah.
I don't have to make excuses why her mom's not here because her mom has died. But I'm going to have a harder time explaining why someone who is still here but didn't want to be with her. And we haven't had that conversation. She doesn't ask. So,
Yeah, you took us through so many things, right? You needing your own space, all those things. And, Ruby is a blessing, but you're a blessing to her too, right? Like that's how you have to look at that. I did want to talk really about one more thing that we had talked about before, about what you're really most worried about when bringing up Ruby, right? You talked a little about having to tell her about her dad, and right, and how
mhm.
he just didn't want her. But what else are you worried about with bringing her up?
There are a few things that I think about. She does she looks a lot like her mom, and sometimes she acts a lot like her mom. And I think there's a tendency that a desire to like fill the hole that is left by Nicole's absence, to recreate Nicole through Ruby. And we cannot view Ruby as a replacement for Nicole. She's going to be her own person. And, you know, it's certainly wonderful when we see those things that are delightful bits of her mom that come through. But we need to let her be her own person and not carry that like feeling that she's responsible for, you know, reliving and being like all this responsibility on her to be like my second chance. Um, and I also, you know, I think about, I really want her to see, you know, we talk about it takes a village, that everyone plays a role and shares a part. Like if she gets to a point where she looks back and thinks that I um did all of her important life things, which is something her mom said once about me. And at the time, I thought it was beautiful. And then I realized it was really unfair. It's unfair of any one person to take on that responsibility. Um, and I don't want Ruby to grow up and feel that she needs to carry that emotional, um, you know, labor as she moves through her life, that it's something everyone can be responsible for. And then I also, um, you know, at some point, I don't really want to look into it, but there's the whole question of nature versus nurture, Teresa, that I don't really want to think about, but I also know, um, you know, Ruby's mom had struggled with addiction, um, mental health issues. Ruby's father, also, um, and his parents as well. So if you think about from a generational perspective and kind of what what might that look like and what does Ruby need to know or should she know at some point so that she can inform her decisions based on what might be different risk factors for her. That's far down the road in the future, but um, yeah, those are all things I think about. I don't have the answers to all of them, but it's things I think about.
Yeah. And I don't think we'd expect you to have the answers. Even I'd love to hear your comments here, right? I can totally understand why you think all these things though, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're gonna have to be, um, again and again in that choice, in the free will choice of, I see this um, with wisdom, and you really are, wisely considering all of these components, and then you have a choice. Where will I go with my attention? I now have this big experience of knowing that it is possible for a mother to try everything and be present and be loving and be active and do the things and be available emotionally and psychologically and financially and physically, and for it to still not be enough to stop the train wreck. I know that. I know that. So I think it is really wise for you to be, someone who is you're a carrier of that wisdom. At the same time, as a result of all of this, you can also be like, so then let me continue to focus on what I know I can impact and influence, and I can change and I can address, and let me be the role model for this little girl. Let me be the one who continues my daughter's beautiful legacy, that synesthesia that she was, bringing through. Let's make this a synesthetic, experience, and let's be in the present moment and cherish this breath and cherish this amazing opportunity for multiple grown-ups to come around this child, but also give yourself the give yourself the gold medal of like, I am the one who, signed on that piece of paper, and that is important too. So I'm never going to let go of the original certificate, and no one is going to ever replace Nicole. But I did sign that piece of paper, and that means something too. So celebrating yourself from that perspective as well. There's a word in Croatian that I wanted to give to you as a, okay, maybe this can help. I learned it first just as a word in Croatian because I just knew it, like regular words in native language, but it took me going through deep burnout for someone, when a soul sister said it, for it to really land as a tool. It's a simple word. It's pomalo. So it's spelled Pomalo. And it means, malo means little. And pomalo means, it's an adverb. It means little by little. How are we going to do this? Little by little. How are we going to do this? Step by step. How are we going to do this? One thing at a time. How are we going to do this? Bite-sized chunks. So it doesn't literally mean any of these things, but it represents all of these, like piece by piece, bit by bit, day by day, moment by moment. Pomalo. And there's this funny way in which my friend used to say it when I would spin out and worry, and she'd say, pomalo. There's this like, calm down the nervous system. Pomalo. And if more kids can learn the idea of pomalo earlier on, great, way of checking in with yourself. So I want to celebrate you, Kim, for being already in that process of pomalo, treasuring your, family members, learning how to treasure yourself and cherish your capacities and your availability for, what you can carry,
Yeah.
and just being here with us on the show and unpacking it all. So
Yeah.
special, so beautiful.
Not an easy story, we know, for you to tell, but it's an important story, right? The story of Nicole, the story of Ruby, and how they interconnect with you. And I think I like Evie said, I can't thank you. I don't think we can thank you enough for being on and telling this story. So thank you so much for being here, Kim. We really do appreciate it. Thank you to all of our listeners. We appreciate you joining us for another week, and we will be back with some other guests in the future weeks. But thanks again to Kim McVicker. And remember, if you have a pivot, step into it.